And so the third day of our hearings for the Legislative Health and Human Services Committee gets off to a flying start today with the medical cannabis program update. And members, we still have the handout from yesterday. It's the big thick packet that DOH so conveniently put together for us. And I think we move now to page 70 something or other.
82?
82. 82, my gosh. And with us we have this morning Andreas Sundberg, the program coordinator, and...
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Chris Woodward. I'm an attorney with the Department of Health.
And an attorney from the department. Great. So we'll turn it over to you, Andrea. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Absolutely my pleasure. We appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about the great work being done by our program. As you can see, I'm going to go through the packet very quickly. I know you have a full schedule today, and with the weather, I'm sure you guys want to get out of here on time. So with the program, the current statistics in the program, we currently have 18,343 active patients. That was actually as of last Tuesday. So I ran the numbers again yesterday. We're actually now at 18,720 active patients with 4,003 personal production license.
400 since Tuesday.
Yes, sir. That's correct. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
These are very active patients.
We have a very active patients, yes, and we are currently at 8 staff, 7 positions in our program. So we're very busy, very, very busy program. We do see that we have had a tremendous increase, especially over the last year. On that original statistic compared to the same time last year was an increase of 6,757 patients in 1 year. Post-traumatic stress disorder remains our highest condition that people are applying under. We have seen a dramatic increase in the number of patients applying who are seeking relief for symptoms related to cancer. That has more than doubled in the last year. So we're glad that those folks are able to get some relief related to their diagnosis. For the next slide, we did implement some regulation changes in February of 2015. It was almost a year-long process. We went through, I believe, 2 public hearings related to those changes. Most of the changes were related to our licensed nonprofit producers and really focused on an increase in the number of plants for our currently licensed producers. They can increase their number of plants based on their fee that they pay. It's anywhere from 30 to 90,000 annually, and their plant count can be anywhere from 150 to 450 plants per producer. And we also implemented testing and labeling regulations to ensure that patients knew what they were actually getting when they were purchasing the product. We implemented new provisions for the approval of manufacturer, labs, and courier services. So those individuals would be licensed separately. In the past, it was just a contract that those agencies would do with the licensed producer and approved by DOH. The Department of Health decided to actually license those individual entities, which we've had a number of them who have applied for and received licensing. And of course, the changes to the licensing fees. Last year, the program also added a number of conditions for qualifying conditions in our program, including Parkinson's, Huntington disease, and ulcerative colitis. And we've seen a number of people applying under those conditions. We do anticipate we will have some new rule changes coming very soon, hopefully within the next several months, that we're going to look at the removal of the confidentiality for licensed nonprofit producers.
What is that?
Right now, our regulations require that the Department of Health keep all information related to licensed producers confidential. So we cannot release it to anybody except for law enforcement in the process of an investigation or patients enrolled in the program. So we're looking at removing that confidentiality clause so that information would be available to the public.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
We're also looking for, there's going to be some amendments to the current rules related to patients. Specifically, we're looking at removing the requirement that there has to be a statement regarding what treatments have failed and requiring that certain practitioners approve certain conditions. By practice, the program has already implemented these as a result of a lawsuit. So we are doing it, so now we're going to be changing it in the regulations to make it official. One of the other exciting things that's happening in the medical cannabis program is we're implementing a new tracking system and a new database. We held a request for applications about a year ago for agencies to apply to design the tracking system for us. BioTrack THC, a company out of Florida, was the winning contractor on that. We're very excited about it because it actually will allow patients to submit their applications electronically, making it a much faster process for them, ensuring that we receive all the records, but it will also allow us to track seed to sale for our licensed producers. So every plant that the producer manufactures will have a barcode. If they take that plant and use it to make cannabis-derived products, then that barcode will be associated on every one of those products, so we know exactly where that product came from. And it also help us increase our access to data. So we're going to know exactly how much product is out there, how much products patients are using, so we'll be able to assess if the adequate supply limit is appropriate for patients. So we're very excited about it, and hopefully we will have that up and running within the next couple of months. So for the next slide, producer licensure, as I'm sure you all are aware, in March of this year, the department opened up applications for licensed nonprofit producers. We received a total of 86 applicants. It was a very extensive application. A request for application was put out outlining exactly what each producer needed to submit. 4 staff from Department of Health were selected to review the applications. Each application was reviewed by 3 staff and scored separately. And then the group came back together after the scores were submitted to make a determination and recommendation of the Secretary of the Department. Once the scores were completed, the Secretary ultimately decided, I believe about 2 weeks ago, to offer licensure to 12 of those applicants. So we are now in the process of working with those applicants to get them up to full licensure. One of the other things that our program is working on is outreach efforts. We're trying to do more to educate the community on our program, as well as educating medical practitioners in the state of New Mexico, how patients qualify, what the risks and benefits are related to the use of medical cannabis. And our staff, we have 1 health educator and our we have 2 medical directors that are doing a job share, so they each work 20 hours a week. And they've been doing a great job of going out and when they have time to actually meet with folks and educate them about the program. They have been all over the state, and we're very proud of the work that they're doing. They've had and completed 13 presentations, with 8 being solely to medical providers around the state. We're really hoping to educate medical providers and ease their concerns about enrollment in the medical cannabis program, so patients feel comfortable going to their own medical provider for recommendation for enrollment. And our staff's doing a very good job. We are seeing an increase in the number of providers who are signing off on the applications. And we're also working on development of materials for enrollees and the community to create more awareness, to ensure that people are completely aware of the rules and regulations around the program, and that they are clear and comfortable with what they can and cannot do. And our medical directors are doing individual reach out to medical providers when they receive an application, contacting them, do you have any questions or concerns about enrollment, explaining the application process to them. And we've seen a tremendous increase in those efforts and the folks enrolling in the program. So that's the quick and dirty of the medical cannabis program.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank
And
you.
did you have anything to add?
I had nothing to add, Mr.
Okay, but in case we ask really embarrassing questions, you're there to...
To be embarrassed.
Members of the committee, questions? Representative Armstrong.
Here we go. Joking with you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, this is the program that's near and dear to my heart. As you may know, the act creating the program was named after my daughter. So I have a special connection to the program. So I have a few questions. I believe that and I don't have the statute or regs in front of me, so tell me if I'm wrong, that an annual audit of the program is required, and I've never been aware of one being done, or is that being done?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Armstrong, it's actually it's an assessment of the program is to be conducted every 2 years. And in the past, what The first year, I believe that the person that was acting as the medical director did provide an overview of the program regarding what conditions were added, the development of the regulations. And in 2013, the program decided to do a survey of enrollees to see how the program was doing and also to assess access to adequate supply. This coming year will be the first year that we're actually going to put together a full assessment of the program in order to identify where we are as a program, where we need to improve, and where the adequate supply is.
And were those previous assessments made public? The survey?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Armstrong, I believe that they were posted. I don't know. I can't speak for the one that was done in 2011. I was not with the program at the time. And at that time, they had no full-time staff. So unfortunately, we do have a gap in some of the documents. The survey that was conducted in 2013 was made available to public.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, and thank you. As you can imagine, people are very excited that there's more producers. Was 12 the number of new producers allowed? 12, was that in regs or statute or something, or was that just a number that was set based on some falling out of applicants?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Armstrong, that number was selected for a couple of reasons. We looked at the current available supply, took into account the increase in the number of plants for the currently licensed producers, and anticipated that that number would meet the need for the patients for the next probably 5 years. In addition, one of the other things we had to look at is the department's ability to regulate and inspect and do surprise inspections on these entities. And based on the number of staff that we will have available to do the inspections, we felt that this was a number that we would be able to sufficiently support.
Thank you. And as you can imagine, with over 80 applicants and only 12 receiving licenses, there's quite a bit of questions about who and how and who didn't and why and how much of that is public.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Armstrong, right now, because of the regulations regarding confidentiality, information is not available to the public. However, once regulations change, there's potential that would be available. Current applicants that were denied may contact our office. We will definitely provide them with their full score sheet, as well as giving them the copies of the applications back if they would like.
Thank you, and Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg. So the applicants who didn't receive a license will have some feedback, at least can have some feedback as to
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's correct. They do need to request it from us, but we would be happy to provide that to them.
And Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, how soon do you expect those new regs to be proposed?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, I always hate giving deadlines because I can tell you that we are actively working on them. We're hoping to hold the public hearing and have that complete within the next 3 months.
Okay, lots of people anxious about that too, as you can imagine. I have a couple of questions. Since the regs, Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, since the regs changed in February, how many of your existing producers have increased the number of plants?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Armstrong, I believe when we did renewals in July, 10 of our producers went to 450. Another few went to 300, some went to 200. There were, I believe, about 4 of them that stayed at 150.
Okay, and remind me again, Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, how many producers are there before the 12 were added?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Armstrong, there are currently 23 licensed producers.
23, plus we've now added 12, so that makes it 35?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, that's correct.
And Mr. Chair, Ms. Sundberg, did those 12 new producers, any idea how fast they're anticipate they're up and going, or if they got their license for what kind of number of plants did they?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, I don't know the exact number. I can look at that and get back to you. The full licensure is going to take time because some of the applicants do need to do build-outs. Some of them are going to be moving their locations because they decided the location they were at was not going to work for them, or there was a problem with the lease. So we don't have a time frame exactly of when they're going to be up and running fully, but we are actively working to identify a structure of here's what we need to do next to get these folks up and running.
So at least some of them were not shovel-ready.
Mr. Chair, that's correct, yes.
Do you have, Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, a projection of budget now that you've got more license? What kind of revenue you're going to see now that you've got
Mr.
more
Chair,
licensees and plants have increased?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, until we know exactly how many plants each of the new producers are going to, we won't know the exact budget. We have estimated, based on the estimation, the program does plan on hiring new staff, with hiring 3 people on the more compliance side to do inspections and aid in making sure that we're getting people licensed and all that. And then we're going to hire 3 staff for the actual office for processing of paperwork.
So what's that budget projection?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, I unfortunately don't have that, but I will happily get back to you with that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pressing on that because I had legislation this last session to try and siphon off some of that new revenue for research. So I'm still interested in that. I mean, you've got significantly more revenue, and I understand the need for additional staff and inspections and oversight, but I'm going to really still strongly try and push for research. I think we have to research, and I think we've got now, when we were talking about that during the session, we were talking about we've got 10,000 people, and now there's 18,000 people, and I think we need to be supporting research for those folks. But at the time, and I'll ask you this, and maybe you can't answer, Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, Department of Health wasn't interested particularly in being the entity that oversaw research. Have you had any discussions
Mr. Chair,
internally about that?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, the department absolutely supports research and does absolutely agree that it is important. We just feel that we're not the entity that has the skills and experience to truly oversee effective research. We would happily support research going to research institutes like, any of the state universities. We absolutely agree that it's important and it should be done. Our biggest concern was related to our budget at the time. We just simply did not have the funding to be able to support it. And our staff they're wonderful. I can't say enough about our great staff, but they're working really hard, and I always worry about burnout because part of my job is to make sure I'm taking care of my folks as well. And we do need to hire more staff. We need to get more people out there doing inspections. But we absolutely support research. If the funding is there, we do support it, but we just do not feel the Department of Health is the best place to house the research.
Okay, thank you. I'll pursue that some more. Thank you.
Yes, on that, would you be willing to work with the legislature on figuring out where to house and how to finance the research initiative?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. Yeah, we're big supporters of research and do feel it's important, especially when we look at the number of folks that are enrolled in the program. We want to make sure that this program is providing health and safety for people, and we need to make sure that we're addressing any of the tertiary or unseen effects. And so we absolutely would be happy to work to identify a great resource for that.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And because I think the University of New Mexico would be interested, so maybe we should have a meeting between the university and the program and talk about how we would structure that. So I'll follow up with that too. Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, I understand that there is a couple of things in the regs that I don't know if you're considering in proposing in the new regs, but things that I've heard about. One is apparently a new requirement to get landlord approval for someone to grow their own. Can you tell me about that?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, that actually is in the current regulations. So a person that is applying for a personal production license, if they do not own the property, they do need to get permission from the property owner in order to grow. The reason that was put into place is we had several issues that came up. The first one being we had property owners that people were doing indoor grows at the properties and caused significant damage to the property related to mold, lighting issues, electrical issues. We also had a handful of patients who contacted our program because they had a personal production license approved, and they were being evicted from the property because of growing at that property. And we felt that if they obtained written permission from the property owner, they had some defense to say, you actually allowed me to do this. The bigger issue that we ran into was the concern from property owners related to federal law that if there were illegal activities going on, there was a possibility that their property would be seized. So we know it wasn't a popular decision, but it really was put in place to address the concerns from the public related to property owners and the concern that we had as an entity for people losing their housing because of these grows.
And Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, how many folks have you heard from, though, that now used to be able to grow and can't grow because they can't get that permission or don't feel, I mean, how are we doing a chilling effect on people being able to grow?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, I've only heard from one person related to that. And I got a release from them authorizing us to speak with the landlord of the property. And once I got that release, I was able to address the landlord's concerns, and they actually ended up being able to stay in the property.
Great, thank you. That's great to know that you will help so that you can appropriately educate landlords so that they're not scared away from doing that. Thank you. And then, Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, the other concern that I have is with annual certification for folks. I mean, most of these folks, it's chronic disease, and to have to get recertified annually, particularly when they were having to go see a special doc. And so I'm not sure how, if some of that is relieved with, if you're taking away in the proposed regs, eliminating all specialty doc requirement, so that any doc, or if some still remain or whatever, but lots of concern about having to find another doctor other than your usual doctor, for a condition that isn't going to change.
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, a couple of issues there that, well, first of all, we are any medical provider licensed to practice in the state of New Mexico whose primary practice is here can confirm the diagnosis. So any doctor can sign. The number one reason that we do have the annual certification is it's in statute. Statute actually requires an annual certification. So we currently cannot remove it from the regulation because it is required under statute.
Okay, and Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, so there won't be in your proposed regs, because I know currently for rheumatoid arthritis or whatever, you have to get a certain specialty doc to confirm the diagnosis. That's all being removed so that any doc, and you don't have to do a specialty doc for anything?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, yes, that's correct.
That would be great. That would be very helpful. I've talked to several people who, just for that fact alone, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, and they live, in Farmington or Hobbs or whatever, there's no rheumatoid arthritis rheumatologist around within the state. They could go out of state, but then they can't. That doesn't work for you if they had to go out of state for that confirmation. So that's good to know that any doc. And then last, Mr. Chair and Ms. Sundberg, tell me more about your outreach and are you outreaching to practitioners and doing not just outreach to do training and information to your producers who are already in the system, but to practitioners, to physicians and others about the program and prescribing?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong. Our staff, our health educator and medical directors work diligently to reach out to medical providers. They've, as I said in the presentation, they've done about 13 presentations over the last year, with 8 of them being to medical providers. They've been all over the state. They were in Silver City a week and a half ago presenting. It was a small group, but they were happy to do those presentations. We also do some individual outreach with medical providers. So if what we tell patients all the time is, if your medical provider has any concerns, have them give us a call or give us their name, and we'll have our medical directors reach out to them in an attempt to educate them and address any concerns that they may have. We hope with the addition of more staff that our health educator will be able to do more of that. Right now, she is unfortunately tied to the office a lot because of the volume of applications that we have. So we're hoping with the new administrative staff that we'll be able to get her out there more and doing more education. We have seen an increase in the number of providers who are signing, which we're very happy to see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say and explain something I said a minute ago of my dear colleague here when I said, oh no, here it goes. I meant that be prepared. She has all the good questions. She's always organized and very knowledgeable and just good at what she does. So I thought, get all your papers out, all the facts in your mind, everything. That's what I meant. It was a compliment, Representative. Let me just say good morning and thank you for your work and your presentation. And I apologize if you had already answered this question or explained it in your discussion, and we can do it afterwards. But I just wanted some clarification, if possible. On page 82, where you under current statistics, where you indicate, Andrea, that the third bullet, this number represents an increase of 6,757 active enrollees. Are these enrollees, you mean the patients, or are they enrollees into the program as producers?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rodriguez, that number represents a number of active patients. So right now we have 18,720 active patients. 1 year ago, at the end of October of 2014, at that time we had 6,757 less. Don't make me do math. I haven't had coffee yet.
Yes, okay, because you had it in the bottom here for the, okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? I have a few, and thank you. First of all, I just wanted to join in the general response of the committee. Very pleased with the way the program is being operated, I think. I was hoping Senator McSorley would be here because he is our resident cannabis expert, but medical cannabis expert, he was the one that sponsored the bill for many years and follows it very closely. And I think he's on his way. He did send a text saying that there is a court ruling today. Did you hear about a court ruling today? That basically...
Southeastern, is it for the one in Roswell?
No, not that one. This one is a federal court. Hang on, let me... my abilities with texting are not great, but let's see what he says here. Hang on. This is going to be anticlimactic when I actually read it. Big Med Cannabis court ruling today under new federal rules, U.S. Department of Justice can't prosecute medical cannabis providers. But I don't know, prosecute for what or when, I mean, but at least, so you might be on the lookout for that. I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction. We're seeing the, oh good. You want to, why don't you explain?
I just found
in a scathing decision, a federal court in California, has ruled that the Drug Enforcement Administration's interpretation of a recent medical marijuana bill defies language and logic, tortures the plain meaning of the statute, and is at odds with fundamental notions of the rule of law. The ruling could have broad impact on DEA's ability to prosecute federal medical marijuana cases going forward. At issue is the Rohrabacher-Farr amendment to last year's government spending bill that lists states that have medical marijuana laws and mandates that the Department of Justice is barred from using federal funds to prevent such states. So it's just a reaffirmation of what the law did, apparently. Thanks, Sean. Anyhow, he may be here to make some comments if I drag this out long enough. Michael reminds me that California and New Mexico are in different federal judicial districts, so it may not have direct, but at least in the general legal environment, I think we're moving toward seeing what New Mexico has done for the last several years as being, probably in the right direction. But I did have a few questions for you about, first, I think your new rules seem to be steps in the right direction, and the ones you're proposing also seem to be really good, especially as Representative Espinosa mentioned, your full disclosure, whatever you're calling it, more transparent.
Right, yes.
One of the questions has to do with that, and that is, do we still have a restriction that only can for-profits produce medical marijuana in the state?
Mr. Chairman, right now, the current regulations prohibits licensure to only nonprofit organizations. That is something that may potentially be coming up during the regulation changes, but at this time, I'm looking to Chris because I'm not really sure.
I think your question probably gets to the discussion that we've heard about management companies.
That was exactly where I was going. Yesterday, we had a comment from during public comment from somebody who was an active participant in the program, and he's concerned that for-profit management companies are basically being delegated or contracted to take over the license of a nonprofit.
I think it's true that a number of producers have management companies and have management agreements with non-nonprofit for-profit corporations to manage their operations and are effectively operating as for-profits by way of those agreements. The explanation they give for those arrangements is that it's so difficult for them to get funding. For example, these nonprofits, first of all, just by virtue of being nonprofit, they can't sell shares in their companies. And they can't, because of the state of the federal law, they can't go to banks and say, take out an ordinary loan and so forth. So they've found ways around that, essentially. And we have seen a number of producers enter into those types of agreements. We're not aware of it necessarily negatively impacting the program. They continue to operate. They continue to get financing to continue their operations, continue producing and distributing. It's something that we're looking at, but from the producer's perspective, I can say that they've been adamant that they're opposed to the nonprofit restrictions, and that because they can't be 501c3s, they can't be federal nonprofits, there is no conceivable tax benefit to being a New Mexico nonprofit. They basically pay all the same taxes that a for-profit company would pay. So that's sort of the discussion that we've had with producers recently.
And is there an anticipation within the department that you might, on a regular basis, or is there like a formula for when you're going to reopen the production license process again?
Mr. Chairman, there's no specific formula in place. One of our goals with implementing the new database is it will give us real-time tracking of yield rates, how much product is available, what products are available to patients. So if we start seeing that, because we can look at it every day, and we can go into producers and we will know within 5% of what they have in stock. And when we go do inspections, they should be within that 5%. But when we'll have those real numbers, so we'll be able to track it more effectively to say, okay, we're starting to see the amount of product available decreasing, so it's time to start looking at implementing new producers. But we have also seen a tremendous increase in yield rates for our licensed nonprofit producers. Those yield rates for plants, even before we increased the plant count, had gone up approximately 80% of how much product they were actually yielding from their plants, because as time went on, they got to be better growers.
Better farmers than.
Better farmers, yes.
What she mentioned earlier, and it doesn't show up in the notes, is that they now have a system for using barcodes. Every single plant will have its own barcode, and that'll then carry through even to the derivatives.
That's correct, yes.
That's good.
I think that company is one that, is it the same company that deals with Colorado?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct, yes.
What are we doing with it? You might have gone over, what are they doing with edibles since it's just still smoking?
That's a good question. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the?
What are you doing with the edibles and oils, or is it just still smoking?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moore, they have a wide range of products available from our producers. Our producers are the ones that determine what products they're going to make available. One of our goals with the new producers is one of the reasons many of them were selected is they do offer a wider range of products. So people have more of an option rather than just ingesting through smoke. The edibles and cannabis-derived products do great for people, especially with chronic pain, and we are encouraging our producers to really invest in making more of those.
And then if they're doing the oils and the edibles, how are they regulating the THC and the actual, the content and the dosage?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moore, one of the changes that we implemented in February of this year was to require testing and labeling on products for our producers. One of the challenges we ran into is we didn't have labs that could actually do the testing at the time. So we've now approved 3 labs that can do proficiency testing to identify THC and CBD content in products. And we're hoping once we know that they're able to meet the demand, we're going to require testing on all products. And they would have to put it on a label of every product that's sold.
So every label will have a thing that says what the dosage is.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moore, that is correct. That's our ultimate goals. So patients know exactly what they're ingesting. Mr. Chairman, we haven't gotten to the point of nutritional value yet. If you're eating a Rice Krispie cannabis-derived product, it's a Rice Krispie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Just to follow up then on that issue of adding new producers regularly, I think, and I don't want to get into the legal case that was just filed, but geographic distribution had been an issue even prior to this recent round of licenses. And I guess it still is an issue, and Representative Espinosa alluded to the situation in the southeast corner of the state as well. Was that one of the criteria that you used in?
Mr. Chairman, we did, when the request for application was put out, we did put out specific criteria that we would evaluate on. One of the big areas was distribution. If somebody was serving a community that was currently underserved, they would receive higher points in the distribution area. However, their production plan may not have been up to par. They may not have had strong financial support, or their security may have been a problem. The challenge we ran into was looking at do we, license people who scored lower, even though if they're in a certain area, and we would be concerned then about the sustainability of that agency and being able to continue to serve. The agencies that were ultimately selected were selected because they had very strong distribution plans. For example, at least 3 of them will be doing weekly deliveries all around the state at a reasonable price. And that was one of the reasons that those agencies were selected.
But would it be possible in the future, instead of going through this whole full-blown, wide-open reapplication process where people have to spend a great deal of money and time preparing the application, to do targeted ones? If you've got an area of the state that still, even with statewide distribution, you consider to be underserved, tracking where your licensees are and your patients are.
Mr.
Did you
Chairman,
just do a targeted one? We want somebody in the southwest corner, or the southeast corner, or whatever, and just go for that, and then not have to go through this whole, or is the process such that you have to do the full-blown thing?
Mr. Chairman, well, I do see that there's probably two options available. I mean, that's something we could definitely take under consideration to say, you know, here's an underserved community. We will only accept applications for this area. One of the other things is we can encourage our currently licensed producers to open distribution points in these underserved areas, you know, maybe once a week, going in to offer product for distribution in that area, or further, depending on the patient count. You know, the push, we actually did do that at one point, extended it out to our licensed producers and said, you know, here's an area that's underserved. We will allow somebody to open a second dispensary in this area. And at that time, we only got one producer that was interested because they just didn't feel it was financially sustainable for them to open a location based on the patient count.
And that, which gets me to an issue that I think Senator Souls and some others have identified in the past, that is getting past the checkpoints.
Mr. Chairman, that's
immigration
absolutely
checkpoint,
correct.
Border Patrol checkpoints in certain areas of the state makes it almost impossible to do statewide distribution in or out of there. I don't know how that,
Mr. Chairman, they can actually go into the area with product, no problem. They just can't come out of the area with product.
oh, so it's okay to, I mean, you can grow it in Albuquerque and deliver it in Anthony and you don't have a problem.
Mr. Chair, that's correct, yes.
Two last quick questions. Self-growing or the personal production, do they have to have the barcodes on their plants too?
Mr. Chairman, no, we do not track the plants for personal production license. Our assumption is that, you know, our enrollees that are growing for their own use are using it for themselves.
And has there been a decrease, or do you anticipate a decrease in the personal production?
Mr.
Some
Chairman.
people have told me it's hard to grow, you know, who knew? But they say it's hard to grow these plants so that they're effective.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, just because it's called a weed, it doesn't grow like
That's
weed.
right, exactly.
We always tell people that it can be very temperamental, very hard to grow. A lot of folks have applied for personal production license, but they're actually started to grow, the plants died, and they decided not to renew it. We do see that the number of personal production license goes up, but not nearly at the rate that we see for active enrollment.
So it's just kind of flattening off. So you think that these new producers will be able, and maybe over time, some of those personal licensees will abandon the project and just go to a distributor?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I potentially believe that's going to happen for a number of folks.
Last question is about tribal governments. What if any, is the new federal policy on tribes having basically, as I understood it, open opportunity? Will that impact the medical marijuana program here in the state?
Mr. Chairman, we do not anticipate it impacting the local program. I have to be honest with you, I'm not completely familiar with that. I don't know if Mr. Woodward is familiar with it.
I'm a little bit familiar with it. I know that there's, Mr. Chairman, I know that there's been some communication to tribes from federal officials pretty much along the same lines as the communication that they've given to state governments to say that, well, in other words, the feds have not said to states or to tribes that they will not enforce the Controlled Substances Act. They've said that they're going to evaluate these things on a case-by-case basis, and that if for the states, they've said if people are in compliance with medical cannabis laws, they're going to be hands-off just as a matter of use of their resources, essentially, not as a matter of law.
Prioritization.
Right. It's just a prioritization. And I think they've essentially taken the same tactic with tribes and have basically told tribes that if they're thinking of instituting medical cannabis laws, if they're thinking of instituting those programs, that they should contact their local attorney and talk with them and sort it out with them. That, as far as I know, that's pretty much the only development that's happened there.
It hasn't been an issue here in New Mexico. None of the new producers are on tribal lands.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. None of them are in tribal lands.
And Senator Rodriguez on that point?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me put this on, yes. So, gentlemen, I forget your name.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rodriguez, my name is Chris Woodward.
Chris, thank you, Chris. So that would mean, and I think I had read something about this, that if the states do it, then the tribes are allowed to do it. Is that kind of in a nutshell? I mean, there's no enforcement, no anything else happening there, as long as the states have it first, or not necessarily?
You mean as far as an overlapping of state and tribal jurisdiction, or?
I think we have an answer from Jessica
Thank you. 'Cause
from the Drug Policy Alliance.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. From my understanding, it's exactly what Chris was saying. The only thing that's new is that the Ogden memo, which DOJ had put out to its U.S. attorneys, but to give them specific ways that they should prioritize their prosecutions, has also been now extended to tribal lands. So it's the same memo, the same 8 things that, as long as it's heavily regulated, there's no diversion, that youth aren't getting it, that, everything is in place, then they shouldn't be prosecuted just as the states shouldn't be prosecuted. But it doesn't matter whether a state has legalized marijuana for its population or not. Tribal lands are sovereign and can, operate on their own with or without a state law allowing it.
I see. Okay, thank you for that explanation. Yeah, that's
Yes, Representative Madalena.
Those are good questions, Mr. Chairman, and I've always thought about that as well, but, I haven't heard anything. I'm from Jemez Pueblo, but I haven't heard any in New Mexico where any tribe is considering any kind of program in this regard, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question would be, of the 3,900 licenses, are any of them native?
Mr. Chair, Representative Mandolina, we have not asked for specific identification of ethnicity for the applicants. I don't believe so, but I can't say definitively.
Chairman, I don't believe as well, but then again, there are a lot of natives that don't live on reservations, and they can, get a license, so to speak, but I have not heard anything in that regard. So it's kind of a new territory, and I don't know if the Pueblos would ever, for my Pueblo, for instance, it would have to go through our process of going up to the tribal council, so to speak, which I'm a member of the tribal council, and I doubt if we'll ever get to that point at this point in time, Mr. Chairman. So, thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Oh, there is one last question. Representative Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did think of one other thing, and no one else touched it, and that's banking. Has there been any movement in New Mexico? I actually don't know. Are there any banks that will handle the accounts of New Mexico producers, or is it all cash?
Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong, it's our understanding that there is at least one bank that we are aware of that is working with the majority of the producers.
Good, thanks. I have heard stories in Colorado with no banks and millions of dollars in cash, so I'm glad someone in New Mexico.
So some of your producers' fees were paid with checks.
Mr. Chairman, all the producer fees the application fees were paid with checks. We do have a couple of producers that pay their fees in cash, and we meet them at the bank in those cases.
It's an interesting. The other angle, of course, and Chris just kind of referred to it briefly, the taxation issue, because this is considered by the feds illegal. There's no deductions for they're paying. With cash. I guess. I don't know how they pay their tax bills, but they're paying a heavy tax toll because they can't deduct any of the costs of operation. Well, thank you very much for bringing us up to date, and thank you for overseeing the program in such a positive fashion. Appreciate that.